Hello! In this video I'm showing you why I chose to wire my 3 Victron solar panels in series instead of parallel, and where I chose not to use an inline fuse. Now I'm doing a conversion on this Volkswagen Crafter to turn it into a camper van, and I'm not making these videos to educate anyone. I'm just showing you what I'm doing in my van, and hopefully they give you ideas and inspirations on converting your own van. And so far the build's going really well. Like I said, I got 3 Victron solar panels on the roof, and I also managed to squeeze in my max air fan, and this is a medium wheelbase fan, so I'm really pleased with the way the build's going. So if you want to check out any of these videos, obviously you'll find them in the links below. Right, now why did I choose to use series instead of parallel? Now just before I get on with it, I just want to say I'm not an electrician, and I found it really hard to find any consistent information about how to fuse a solar panel array in series. So I've got all my information from a guy called Nate on Van Life Explorers, and he seems to be an electrician, and he explains everything in detail that you should need to know about your van electrics. So I would highly recommend checking out his channel, and I'll leave a link to it in the description below. Now the two really important differences between series and parallel is that when you wire up in series, you add up the volts of each panel and the amps stay the same. And when you wire up in parallel, you add up the amps and the volts stay the same. Now this is important for all sorts of reasons, depending on how many panels you got in your van, depending on the weather you're likely to be taking your van out in, to whether you get an early wake up in the morning of the panels. Now this can make a huge difference to your installation and how much it's going to cost you and how much charge you're going to get off your solar panels. So it's really important that you choose the right method for your van. And like I said, I've chosen series for my van because that's where I think it's going to give me the best charge off the solar panels in our rather cloudy England. Also, because of the way I'm wiring these panels up in series and the wires that I'm using to come to my MPPT charger, I'm not fitting an inline fuse. This may be controversial, but I just think we don't need it, and I'll explain why later in the video. Now here's my 3 solar panels wired up in series. So all we do is just link the panels together. It's pretty straightforward. So obviously you've got our plus coming out. I mean, we take this as panel number 1. You got plus coming out, it goes into the negative on the next panel, then the plus comes out, goes on to the negative on the next panel, and then it comes out the other side plus, which comes around onto the MPPT charger. And then of course we got the neutral coming around here, which is also going into the MPPT charger, and then of course it comes across and charges up my battery. So here's the way the numbers work with the series. So each of my panels, on the back of it there's a label which tells me how the panel will operate. So it says that the maximum voltage is going to be 23 volts. So I've got 23 volts on this panel, 23 volts in this panel, 23 volts in this panel, add them all together, that gives me 69 volts. And like I said, the amps stay the same, so now we've just got 9 amps coming out the end. So we've got 69 volts, and then I've only got 9 amps. Now here's the 3 same panels wired up in parallel. You can see now that we have our plus coming out and our plus coming out, and then it all just go to plus. Same on this side, we have minus coming out, where it then comes back to the MPPT charger. So now if we look at the numbers for our parallel, we've got a 23 volts still, but that stays the same, and now our amps get added together. So we've got 9 amps plus 9 amps plus 9 amps gives us 27 amps. So you can see here when I look at these numbers, I've got very different numbers here. I got 69 volts on the series and only 9 amps, but on the parallel I got only 23 volts and I got 27 amps. Now I just want to add to this that the voltage of 23.74 volts is the open circuit voltage. But when the panels are under load, the voltage is going to be lower at 19.38 volts. And this is going to affect the operation of the panels, which I'm going to get onto now. Now there's pros and cons to each of these systems, but like I said, I chose Series for a couple of reasons. Now I live in England where it's very often cloudy and we do get sunshine, but a lot of time there can be cloud around. But we have a very long day, so we have a day from sort of 4 o'clock in the morning it starts getting light, and it doesn't get dark until about 10 o'clock at night in the summer. Now why is that important? Well, it means that my panels will start working and creating electricity even in the very early morning where it's quite low in light, and they carry on working all the way through the day until 10 o'clock at night, again when it starts getting dim. But because my panels are working at a higher voltage, so working at 69 volts, the MPPT charger can do more with a higher voltage than it can with a lower voltage. So if I was running in parallel, then the voltage coming off here may not be 23 volts. It might be quite a bit lower. And then the MPPT charger then can't do so much with that voltage because the battery needs to be charged around about 14 volts. And if the maximum this is going to run at is 23 volts, then it's going to be a charge that's going to be a lot lower than that. And then the charger is going to struggle to actually create any amperage out of that voltage. Whereas with this one here, it's going to be running at, maybe again, it's not going to be running at full power because the light's quite dim. But even if I was getting half the power out of these, I'm still going to have, what's that, 33 volts coming off this, which then my MPPT charger can do more with it and turn it into amps, which is going to charge up my battery. So for instance, if my panels start working at a much lower voltage, so say instead of getting 23 volts off each panel, I was getting half that. So I was only getting, what, 12 volts off that. But still, if you add up 12 volts off each panel, I'm still going to get 36 volts. Whereas if I was using it in parallel, in the morning when they're just waking up, the sun's just coming up, if I've only got 12 volts coming on each panel, that means that the voltage going into the MPPT charger is only 12 volts. Then the charger can't do much with that 12 volts because the battery needs to be charged at around 14 volts. You can see it's going to take longer for these panels to start working. But then one of the disadvantages over Series is that if this panel here gets shaded for any reason, it affects the entire array. So if this then gets shaded here and it's only putting out 12 volts, then the rest of the panels may only start putting out 12 volts. Whereas in this configuration here, I could stop that panel working altogether and these two panels will continue to work completely separately to this panel here. So this one could be in shade, but these would still be generating lots of electricity and charging up my battery. Now how about this wire size? Because I bought this as a kit, it came with 6mm wire, which is then rated at around 70 amps. So I'm not going to have any worry with voltage drop down the cables or trouble with the amperage going down the cable. It's going to carry that voltage and amperage without any problem at all. And that would be the same for this system down here. If I was using 6mm cable, again, it was fine for the amperage and it's rated between 60 and 70 amps. But then the system's maximum amperage is only going to be 27 amps. So I'm not really worried about any voltage drop and I'm not really worried about over amping it because 6mm cable is going to cover that without any problem at all. And whether I use series or parallel, I'll still get the same amount of power out of all three panels to charge up my battery. So why would my panels wired up in series not need a fuse? Now on the back of the panel, there's some information regarding how the panel operates. Now we have a maximum current running when it's running correctly at 9.03 amps. So the panel runs at 9 amps when it's working correctly. And because it's wired up in series, it will only ever run at 9 amps. Then we have a maximum short circuit current of 9.89 amps. And then a maximum series fuse rating of 15 amps. So as I understand it, if the short circuit current is less than the maximum fuse rating, then it does not need a fuse because we're never going to reach this 15 amps. So this 15 amps here means that this panel here can handle a maximum current of 15 amps. So say that one of the panels have developed a fault, we know that the short circuit current is then going to be at 9.8 amps. And because the panel is rated at 15 amps, we know that this amperage is not going to exceed this 15 amps. And because they're in series, it's never going to go above that 9.89 amps. So even if I've put an inline fuse at 15 amps, it's never going to trip that fuse because it's only ever going to run at 9.89 amps. So it's pointless putting a fuse in. Now if I was to drop this fuse rating and put it at a lower amperage, either it's going to start tripping that fuse and it's going to cause nuisance tripping, or it's just never going to trip at all. So again, what's the point in adding a fuse? So that's why I think I don't need to fit an inline fuse, because the maximum short circuit amperage which any one of these panels could run at is 9.89 amps, and the maximum current which the panel can take is 15 amps. So it's never going to reach that. So that's why I think it's just not needed. Now if I was installing these panels in parallel on my van, then I would definitely need to add a fuse in line on each panel. And that's because the amperage of 2 panels added together is around 19 amps, which is above the minimum fuse rating. But I'm not going to go into that in detail on this video because I'm not fitting panels in parallel. Of course, I will be fitting an inline double pole isolator, so that's going to go just about here somewhere, and then I'll be able to isolate the panels. Now just for a quick regard of isolators, I've seen people using isolators, and just remember, because this is running at a higher voltage, you need to make sure that your isolating switch will handle that higher voltage. Now another thing I had to consider when I was going to wire this up in series is this higher voltage here. So my system's going to be running at 69 volts or possibly a little bit more. Then I need to make sure that my charger, so I'm using this MPPT Victron Solar charger, and this will take 100 volts. So it's going to handle that without any problem at all. But if I use a different charger which wasn't able to handle this voltage, then I may have to consider wiring it up in parallel instead. So that's just another consideration, but like I say, I'm using this one, so it's going to be absolutely fine. Now I hope that all makes sense and it's not as clear as mud, but I'm not an electrician and I don't usually explain how to wire things up, but this is the reason I'm wiring it up in series, and that's why I don't think I need to use a fuse. Now feel free to make as many comments as you want down below, because it's always interesting to hear what people say. And if you want to check out any of my other videos, obviously check in the description again. I'll leave links to all the other videos which are in this series. And of course, as usual, please give me a thumbs up, click on subscribe, ring on the bell, share it with all the other fan folks. And as usual, a cup of coffee is always really appreciated. Hope to see you in the next video.